Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with introductions.
Kate Byron, CFO for MOA.
Shirley Nelson, Chair of Budget Advisory Commission.
Bryant Robbins, Municipal Assessor.
Elvie Gray Jackson, Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee.
Dick Cheney, Assembly Member.
Bill Evans, Assembly.
Tim Steele, Assembly. Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Amy DeBoski.
And if we can go around the room, everybody else who's
Barbara
here.
Jones, Municipal Clerk.
And the,
Staff support.
and the two ladies back here, please.
Bruce Outlaw Young, Legal Assistant, Assembly Counsel.
Sherry Sailor, Senate.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Geyer, you're on.
Okay, we have a few things for you, just a few announcements to make, and then I wanted to walk you through the set-aside calculations. The numbers are still moving, but the movement is much smaller, $100,000 today on fund balance, so the accountants are really getting the number hammered. So I thought it was worthwhile to take this out and show it to you today. First is an announcement about the 6-year fiscal plan. We were counseled by Planning and Zoning to get started on that earlier this year. They didn't want to see it 2 days before it was due to be presented to you. So we've initiated conversations with the Budget Advisory Commission and also Planning and Zoning to put together a team to work on the 6-year fiscal plan. I think it's going to be a very important activity this year given the state's situation, and so we're going to get started on that. We're meeting with Planning and Zoning to propose this to them in May 7th, I believe. So we're going to form a little working group, and we're going to work together on the 6-year fiscal plan. The risk, the reason that Muni, I think, has not put the 6-year fiscal plan out early before is that there was concern that the first year, the 2016 budget line item in this event would be, it's not going to be an estimate. It wouldn't be a mayor's budget. It's really a projection that people work on together. So that 2016 column historically has always equaled the budget, which is why you get it really close in alignment with the budget.
Can we pause for 1 second, please? Sorry. I'd like to recognize Brent from Property Appraisal. And Dan Moore, our treasurer, would you please join us at the table? Thank you. Thank you.
So we just want to be clear that this is going to be a projection. These are thoughts and ideas that we'll be presenting to you, but it won't be a mayor's budget, which it always has in the past. And the new administration that's coming in may want to take a different flavor, but for now, we're going to start the process going. The next is, we talked to the Budget Advisory Commission last time it met about, and also with Mark Foster about administrative consolidation. Maybe it's time again. As those of you who've been on the Assembly for a very long time, we have over the past tried to look at synergies that might be possible with the school district in terms of administrative consolidation. Mark and I are very interested in that possibility, but we're not policymakers, we're doers for these. So we talked to the Budget Advisory Commission about whether they supported some idea of working toward consolidation and looking again, reopening all those books and studies that's been done many times on how we could work together. So we asked Budget Advisory Commission to look at that to see if that's something they wanted to support, some kind of letter to the governing bodies to see if they were interested.
And if I can interrupt again, first I'd like to recognize Marilyn Banzoff. Please join us at the table. She's the OMB director. And I also like to say that there is in the Ombudsman's office a massive file on ASD and Muni consolidation efforts. When I was staff, and Pat Abney was on these, Dick, you remember this.
I was on
it was pretty massive. So we have a lot of files, and if anybody wants to view them, just let us know. Okay?
So we would
Thank
not
you.
move forward on that until we felt that the Assembly and the school district were behind any effort, because we don't want to make policy. We just want to let you know that we're willing to work on it over the summer, see what we can do. But we won't probably begin that until we hear from
And
our
if you
governing
do,
bodies.
please feel welcome to use our resources.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The last thing is I wanted to go over with you very quickly the calculation of fund balance set-asides. You'll recall that we went through this earlier in the year, and I promised you when we got a good number that we were fairly solid with. I'd go through these calculations. I know these are numbers on paper, but I would just like to quickly walk you through how the fund balance set-asides are calculated. We start with an column number, call it column number 2, unreserved fund balance at 12/31/14. That's the number that the auditor, that the accountants give us. So we wait and wait and wait and wait, and they look at revenues minus expenditures and fund balance. And once they say we're confident enough to give you fund balance, they give us this number of 59 million. Then we reduce out the appropriation of fund balance that's funding the original appropriated budget of 1.2 million. That leaves us with item column number 4, which is 58,464,000. So that's basically the available money that's left after the original budget is passed. Then they do a combination of activities. They say, what were the total expenditures on the audited financial statements? Now, they're unaudited right now, but they're fairly close, 723 million. They take out items that go in revenue and come out of revenue, or transfers to other funds, which serve for accounting purposes. You have to put them in there, but they actually serve to inflate the expenditure balance. You'll notice the 68 million that's sitting on roads and drainage, that's a refunding of a bond. So you don't really want to calculate your fund balance set aside based on those numbers, because they can be zero as they were last year, and then big, 68 million as it was this year. So we take that out of the set aside calculation. And then we also take out, as you know, the school district funding of 236 million. That leaves 384,000, which is our base for the set aside. We calculate 10%, which is the amount that we, item number looks like it's Z.
Yeah, you did.
We calculate 10% of that number for each of the funds. And then we also have a tax set-aside reserve that we carried forward from last year. And it's on the appeal, it's up at the Supreme Court level, so we just set aside that number. We did not change it from last year. And that gives you kind of an available fund balance of $13 million. And then, after we achieve those set-asides, we take out what we call the working capital, or the 2% set-aside. And that number can go from 2% to 3% by your ordinance. We just calculate it at this moment at the base of 2%. So what you see there is a 2% capital calculation of 7 million. So at the end of that whole process, you have available fund balance of 6 million. And this money is unfettered. It is unreserved fund balance and available for any activity you may desire. The mayor in his budget has proposed to use 5.7 million of that. The budget that you received the other day, 5.7 million of that amount to, it's called taxpayer relief. So that's included in the mayor's budget. So these numbers are still moving somewhat, but the movement is much smaller. So what this schedule will tell you, and what we'll put in a more fancy PowerPoint tomorrow, is that you've achieved the 10% set aside and the 2% set aside. And the results of operations are that you had 6 million available, from which the mayor has used 5.7 taxpayer relief in his revised budget that he's proposed to you on Tuesday night.
Any questions before I start, Mr. Steele?
The mayor proposed the expenditure of a certain amount of bound money for the alcohol drug abuse program. At least that's what the newspaper article said this morning.
Yes.
And where does that show up, or where is it? Where did that funds come from?
Yeah, those funds very likely came from this 5.7 million. And we're going to run you through the entire calculation of the budget, I believe, in a work session tomorrow, Mr. Steele.
Okay.
We'll give you very clear information about that.
Okay.
Okay, I have a couple questions. What was the net indirect cost at the end of the year?
You're talking about total lapse. I believe it was 11.5 million.
Okay.
I think I wrote that down and gave that information to someone already.
Well, let me just say this, okay? That's the number I saw.
Right.
And when I saw 7 million in the mayor's document, I was like, really? You know, but I'm glad that I asked the question, because the 11.5 is the number that I saw when I looked. So thank you for that. And then, so if the mayor's going to, you're saying, well, the mayor's, the document that we got on Tuesday for introduction, it said 7 million. So now it's down to 6 that's available?
The mayor's,
His first quarter budget resolution said that there was $7 million available.
that he used.
He used
So I
7.
believe it was the 1.2 plus the 5.7. That's how you get to his 7 million.
Okay, so is it 6 or is it 7?
So there was, after the set-asides, there's $6 million available.
Okay.
The mayor, of that $6 million, in the first quarter budget revision, the mayor used 5.7.
Right.
And in the original budget, there was an appropriation of 1.2 million. So when he says 7, he's adding the 1.2 plus his 5.7 to get 7 million.
Okay.
total that he used.
So-
I'm sorry if this is.
Well, that's
confusing.
okay, you know, we'll have a more in-depth presentation tomorrow,
Yeah.
but then, so if he's proposing to use 5.7 for property tax relief, what's left for assembly proposed amendments, 300,000 based on the 6?
If you're gonna take it out of fund balance, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay. All right, I think that's it for now, Mr. Trainee.
Okay, question for you. Solid waste services. Understand the mayor's planning on taking $8 million out of that, out of the reserve fund?
Through the chair, the mayor's proposal is 5 million.
$5 million?
5 million
That's
of
correct.
8.
5 million.
Of the
out
8?
Well, they have 7.7 million in available cash, and the mayor has proposed to take 5 million as a one-time dividend.
And use it for what?
I believe that it supports the proposed budget that the mayor has. And we'll go
In
over
what
that.
area, Kate? Is that, what area, is it for SAP or what does he want to use the money for?
No, it supports all the first quarter budget revision modifications.
Okay.
So what we'll show you tomorrow is the proposed modifications to the budget. Many of those are inclusive of salaries. I think 2.5 million, my last recollection was increases for APD and fire. So all of those additional costs, the mayor's proposed to use with 2 primary funding sources. The first is the 5.7 million of fund balance, and the second is the $5 million dividend that the mayor proposed to take from solid waste services.
What will that leave them? What will that leave solid waste?
That'll leave solid waste with about 2.7 million in available cash.
Okay.
And we're also making a plan to go over that with you tomorrow in detail as well.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I haven't issued that, but we can talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, they have a work plan, and taking 5 million out of there, then they can do the expansion, which would give us greater revenue and so on and so forth. But that's something we can talk about tomorrow.
Thank you. Any other comments before we go on? Okay, please continue.
Okay, well, we've taken up a good amount of your time. Mr. Moore's here. If you have any questions or if you have some information.
I was just gonna say, I think the last meeting I reported, the revenue side of the budget for 2014, it was a $3.1 million variance just on revenues, and that was 0.5% compared to what was budgeted. That information we give to you through an AIM, and it should have hit on the 14th, and I just realized before this meeting that it actually wasn't on the agenda, even though the pay side was assigned about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm gonna look into that. So on the 28th, you'll actually get that report. It'll also have that historical quarterly information about hotel revenues and some of those other things that are supplemental. But anyway, we're still the exact same numbers that we gave you a month ago. It's just the detail, unfortunately, didn't make the 14th, so I apologize.
So, Madam Chair, we could give that to you in a draft standpoint, so you could have it, and then we could process it through.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, and we have it in electronic form, so we can send it to Barbara Jones, so you
To go to the entire committee.
Yeah,
I'd
I'll do
appreciate
today.
that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Any other comments, Mr. Moore?
that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from Ms. Banzoff? Thank you.
She's looking curiously for tomorrow.
Okay,
And
great.
then Bryant wanted to have him.
Right, we're going to get to that in a moment, but first I want to see if anybody else has any questions. Okay, well, let's move on. And the next item on the agenda is a report from the Budget Advisory Committee. Ms. Nelson,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
you're welcome.
We have been busy, as you've known, with the tax exemption report, and it's pretty much out of our hands now, but just as references. So we have been spending a little more time on the school budget and stuff, as that's been in the forefront right now. But some of the concerns that are coming up with our commission is the debt reimbursement with the bonds that have been going through. So Mark Foster was at our meeting this last time, and a question was asked, well,
if the state does not do the cost sharing for 60 to 70%, what does that actually mean to the taxpayers of Anchorage? And Mark said that that would be up to the board. So I think it is a concern that we need to be looking at, because we are looking at some issues with the state, and that has been the talk. So if the bonds, and with the report that just came out from the Great City Schools, also with the concern of overinflating some on the bonds, that has been a conversation with our commission, with the school board and Mike Abbott. For example, Airport Heights were coming in way over budget. Our point being, as caretakers of or to be advisors to the citizens, we are concerned that maybe the taxpayers need to be more aware of this, and we had asked that if there is leftover money, that perhaps conversation could be that it goes back to the taxpayers. ASD in February did have a special meeting with legal services, and it was that if there is money left over, if it's bond to bond, and Mark did confirm this at this meeting, if there is money left over, bond to bond, ASD has the flexibility to move that money and to use it to alternate capital projects. If it is a bond to capital improvement project, it has to go through board approval. So we were just educating ourselves on that, so if there is excess money, and I think that it is a topic that is coming up more and more, obviously, just recently and stuff. So that is something we want to follow. In February, the Anchorage School Board voted with their new budget. We, as a commission, recommended to them with this excess money that was found, that they do not, we had 2 recommendations, do not put that money towards hiring new teachers, and that they keep the money for the following year. And shortly after that, the Anchorage School Board voted to not do that, and they put it into the budget, and they hired teachers to fill 6th grade. So they hired 19 teachers to put in the 6th grade, so they could have an extra planning time. So that was $2.7 million out of that. So this is something that we are kind of following the trend, I guess is what we're saying. That, and in just recently when Ed Graff, the superintendent, handed out the report showing $29.4 million that they're looking at maybe reductions, we're kind of concerned on how those figures keep being pushed out, because the state asked them not to include $9 million, and that is included in that figure of $29 million. And also the fact of the extra money, and now they want to retain teachers. So these are things that we're looking at as the commission. So this next meeting in May, we've decided to do a small work session to possibly go back and look at the trends and just put some consistency and information out there to follow what is exactly going on, because these figures keep coming out, but I think they're not really reflecting what was the true cuts, is what we are seeing with money being added in. So that's just one. Also, we had Brad Keithley come, and Joe Riggs is a member of Commonwealth North, and so they did a presentation at our Budget Commission meeting. And I have extra copies if anyone wants to see it, just on the fiscal challenges. So we're trying to stay informed as to what the state is doing too, so that we can make some educated, advised statements, I guess I want to say. And also, as Kate was saying, we want to look into this in the next month here to work with this consolidation, to learn more about it. And 3 of the members of the BAC are going to be a subcommittee involved with this project with Kate and the Budget Advisory Commission. And I think that's probably mostly up to date. We're busy.
It's a great report. Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Traney?
Surely one thing to keep in mind when you look at the state bonds is that's every year they have to do an appropriation for all the bonds they've ever passed. So they could go back and say bonds 10 years ago, for that one we're not going to fund that one. It's subject to an appropriation of the legislature. It's not just this year's bonds. And I don't think the public knows that in some cases. So I'd be interested from the perspective, if the state dropped their bonds completely, paying it, what the impact on the Anchorage citizens would be.
Correct.
Not that they ever would, but they could.
Ms. Guard and then Mr. Steele.
Madam Chair, we were on the telephone with Standard & Poor's on TAN's bond issuance, and they brought up this issue and have requested that we write them a letter at the conclusion of the legislative session on what the status is.
Thank you. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, that's my concern too, is if they don't honor the commitment for these new bonds, that's one thing, but if they drop the contribution that they're making on old bonds, that's going to be a huge impact.
Sure. I think, and we're concerned, and we would like to learn more about it. So I
Standard
think.
Poor's is too, I'm sure.
And you're more than welcome, please, to join us. This will be in the May meeting, where we would just like to pool some information that we're gathering and put together just bullet points, and then we could spend the next month researching it as well too. But this is kind of the topic and where we're heading with it. And for me, I believe been in education for 30 plus years. It's a passion, so my heart goes out to the students and stuff. So I never want to take that away. But I think the taxpayers, it's so important that respect is there. That it is open, it's open dialogue, and that everyone is brought into it, because we are going to have to start making contributions, I think, on all sides. And we're going to look at the healthcare too, and I know that's a topic coming up. And just as an example, the school district negotiated with the teachers $1,600 a month is what the school district pays on health benefits, and they upped the teachers from 50 to 75. So, we look at it as a realistic, that maybe they're going to have to be giving a little bit more on the teacher's part, and we can hopefully keep one more teacher. So I think that's just one way we can start looking at it, that we're all going to have to contribute. And because we're in for some tough times.
Really? Just kidding. Mr. Trainee?
Sure, there's another aspect of the healthcare. There's a lot of teachers that have alternate health cares. They can be married to someone in the military. And so their money for their health care goes to the union that keeps it to reduce the cost. You might want to look into that sometime, how much money we're talking about. Because there are a lot of teachers that are married to military members. They never choose to get health care, but the money that's appropriated for them goes to the union to offset everybody else's.
I think they have changed.
No, they
that.
haven't.
They haven't?
I thought
No.
they had too.
No, they haven't.
Yeah. I thought they, didn't we, I will look into that.
I would look into
though,
it.
Right, because I think,
Because I think there's a lot of money there.
right.
Okay, Ms. Nelson, when's the next Budget Advisory
The
Commission
first
meeting?
Wednesday of the
School
month,
district.
so
Right,
it would be
but what-
May 6th, I want to say.
May 6th, the first Wednesday, okay, great.
So we're gonna keep that as
Otherwise,
kind of just a
teacher.
work session to try to pull in as much information as possible, and that will be our focus.
So May 6th for anybody who wants to join us, okay? All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a presentation on fire protection sprinkler system. And the reason why this is on the agenda is because this committee, like the rest of the assembly, really appreciates the work that the Budget Advisory Commission did on the property tax assessments and exemptions. And we've been paying attention. And as you know, our last meeting, we had the subject of the nonprofit issue, and that was a little bit too soon, and we're going to continue to deal with that issue, but we're going to bring the stakeholders to the table before we do anything. But I thought, and so did the committee, that it was a good idea if we looked at the fire sprinkler exemption. So with that said, that's why I invited Brent and Brian, and I thank you for being here, to come to our committee and talk about it and talk about what our options are. So you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fire suppression exemption is mandated in Alaska statute. It's under 2945-030 AL 1 through 2. We looked into the history of the exemption a little bit, and it was implemented in the early 80s. It looks like it was introduced in 1980 and enacted in 1981. During that time, there were a number of things going on. Obviously, Alaska was experiencing beginnings of a building boom at that point. We were adding more building inventory, and there was a significant amount of concern that maybe some of these buildings weren't safe. At the same time, nationally, it looks like there were some significant advances in fire suppression systems that were occurring during that time. And there was a lot of discussion nationally about fire suppression systems and ways to encourage people to put them into buildings. The brief research I did indicates that Alaska was sort of leading the way on this as far as this tax abatement to encourage a sprinkler installation. When we looked at this, one of the statistics that was thrown out was that at the time that this was being discussed, it looks like in the 80s, about 7,700 deaths occurred every year due to structure fires. And so I got curious and I looked up what the current rate is. In 2013, there were 2,855 civilian deaths due to structure fire. So there's a point of comparison. The research we did, and this is by no means exhaustive research, but
Can I ask one question
Sure.
before you continue? So those deaths are statewide?
this was nationally.
Oh, national.
National.
Oh, okay. Oof. Thank you.
It looks like two prime movers are behind this legislation were the fire suppression industry and the insurance industry. They were wanting to push for the installation of fire systems, obviously. So we move forward into the present, and obviously I think the implicit question being asked is, has this exemption outlived its usefulness? There are other incentives in place now. If you don't have a fire suppression system, it's likely to affect your financing of a commercial building particularly. It would also affect your insurance rating. Inside the municipality, the requirements for installation of fire suppression systems are actually administered by the fire department. And we spoke with Mark Warren in the fire department. He indicates that there's no definite requirement for fire suppression systems inside the municipality. It depends on a number of factors. Those include size, construction type, location of the building, how close is it to other property lines, and occupancy type, and fuel load. And by fuel load, he means a warehouse storing sand, for example, wouldn't have the same requirement as a warehouse storing flammable liquids. So, and that's just an obvious example, but currently in the municipality, this exemption equates to about $500,000 in taxes shifted. It amounts to about $35 million in assessed value, and there are about 825 properties with this exemption right now. I need to make you aware of an issue particular to the municipality regarding this exemption, and that is that $35 million number should probably be lower. As I read the statute, the exemption was meant to apply to 2% of the assessed value of the property on January 1st following the installation of the fire suppression system. In the municipality, we're exempting 2% of the assessed value of the property. And so that floats with the value of the property. As the value of the property increases, the value of the exemption increases. It looks like it's been that way for 30 years. And I think the reason is that our CAMA system doesn't allow us to enter a hard number for this exemption. In other words, it has to be entered as a percentage. It won't take a hard dollar number. So the solution to that problem is not at all simple. First of all, you'd have to get a programmer to change the old CAMA system, and that's the scope of that job, as I know. Then we could probably sort of retroactively estimate the value of buildings as of a point in time. that's not insurmountable, but what may be insurmountable is trying to determine when these sprinkler systems or the fire suppression systems were actually installed. So I just became aware of this a couple of weeks ago, still looking into it. I don't have a great solution to this issue to hand you right now, but I did want you to be aware of it since it's going to be discussed at various levels in government.
Right. Mr. Trainee has a question.
Does the exemption ever expire?
No.
Okay.
If we get
How-
a notice from the fire department that
Okay.
it's no longer in service, we'll take it off.
Or is it terrible?
But there's no system right now that after a specific period of time, 10 years or 20 years, makes it wink out of existence. So you could have that building for 40 years and keep getting this exemption every year.
Mr. Steele?
So there is no building code requirement. This is basically like you said, the value certainly in insurance rates and, that type of thing. But do we, under the building code, do we require fire suppression for certain size or certain types of buildings?
And through the chair, I'll defer to Brent on that. He actually spoke with
Before you answer Mr. Steele's question, can I ask a question on what you just said? So, because of the issue in CAMA, okay, and one of my questions is, CAMA's going to be upgraded eventually because it needs to be. So, are you saying that the exemption is has been more than it should be because of the problems with CAMA?
yes, we are.
Okay, so we're never going to recover that money because it's too little, too late. Okay, I just wanted clarity on that. So, okay, thank you. Okay,
Madam
John.
Chair, the question was
Sorry.
But it'll be how long-
Does
how long do
does
you let it
the
lead?
building code, does
How long do you let it lead?
we
How
adopt
long do you
building
let it
codes
lead?
from the national building code, does it
If this thing
require or
Doesn't
suggest or?
expire ever.
I
How
talked
long do you want it to
to
lead?
Right.
Public Works and was referred. They said, we don't handle that.
the fire
You need
department?
to talk to the fire department, and that's where I went.
I can see them doing the inspection, but I can't see them doing the requirement. I don't know. And
Okay, thank you, Mr. Steele. You can continue.
Just basically that the fire department
So we don't know
is the
yet.
lead
Just
agency.
basically-
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they have a formula or a combination of factors.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Brian, you want to continue?
That concluded my presentation, so I'm open to
Okay,
other questions.
okay, great. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Evans?
Yeah. Of the 830-some properties that received this exemption, were you able to determine through what the fire department said how many of those are required to have fire or sprinkler systems?
I'm sure I didn't ask that question.
Okay.
They probably don't know
what
themselves.
law makes them require it is the question.
It's the factors that he listed, among others, he said, they do their calculation and decide. I didn't really delve into that.
And I'm not an expert by no means on any of this, but, my thoughts are, if there are 825 properties that have fire sprinklers, that they're required to have it because they're really expensive. Really expensive. So, anyway, any other,
So-
Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I was thinking that the reason that they didn't put a date when the discount from taxes went away
Do you want
is because it's real expensive, and they figured that they were going to invest millions of dollars possibly into installing these fire sprinkling systems, and so they get 2% deduction off their taxes every year forever. Do you think,
Insurance.
is that, do we think that's the reason that there's no drop dead date on this?
Through the chair, we weren't able to get the legislative intent at this point. We started looking into that, but we weren't able to get into it. I think Steve Van Zandt, the former state assessor, apparently he was involved in actually working with the legislature to draft this. We weren't able to talk to him prior to this meeting. He's retired now, but we might be able to get some more information from him as far as intent and the discussions that went on at that time.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Trainee?
Do we as a city have the ability to opt out of this, or is the state mandated program, we have no choice?
Through the chair, yes, it's mandated. We don't have the choice.
Okay. Because I know that was one of the discussions we had before. And
It seems to me what it probably is that there's a national fire code that we adopt and therefore, and that the fire department implements. And so, I suspect that's what it is.
Seems reasonable.
Because some of these exemptions we found over the years, the state allows the city to opt into it.
Right.
And we need to find out with the legislation if there was an opt-in or an opt-out provision built into it.
Through the chair, this is definitely a mandated exemption, and largely those the optional exemptions are under one statute, and the mandatory are under another. This is under the mandatory exemptions.
Okay, Mr. Evans?
It's easier.
Just to get a better head around these things, would it be possible to get information on like 5 selected properties of varying sizes where we could actually analyze the cost of their sprinkler system and how much they've been exempted over a period of time since whenever they started receiving the exemption, for just like 5 varying types of properties, just to get a sense of, I guess everybody, we're concerned that, at some level they've been actually more than paid for their sprinkler systems. But it'd be good to have some real tangible, real numbers on that.
We could probably do 5 benchmarks, maybe using Marshall and Swift numbers for estimating the cost of the sprinkler system.
And we do have possibly able to get a number from there's a condo project over here that burned a few years ago.
Yeah.
They installed the sprinkler system in the north portion of that, so there may be, and they just applied for their sprinkler exemptions.
Anything you can do along those lines, because if we have to, seek a legislative change in Juneau to this too, it'd be nice to have some concrete examples we can say about this exemption, maybe well intended at one point, is producing these results.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Yeah. Mr. Steele?
Marshall Swift might be a good source, because if a building is destroyed by whatever, the appraisers come in and they put value in there, they're going to give some value to that destroyed or that system to have to replace it.
We could just do a payback analysis at 2% exemption. That equates to what amount of tax, and
Ultimately,
over what time would it take to pay that back?
if I can, ultimately what we're going to have to do is to figure out what the process is to make changes should we need to do it as well. And if it's an exemption to the fire code, or if it's a state law that's required that they adopt it in a certain manner or something, we need to.
I have a couple questions. Well, actually, one. So Steve Van Sant is gone?
Yes.
Really? So who's the new state assessor?
Ron Brown.
Ron Brown? Okay, that's good to know. And so, any other questions before I continue? Okay. So I took some notes, and there's definitely some follow-up issues. And one is you're going to research the state's intent, and then there were some questions for the fire department, and they're not here. And then Mr. Evans brought up a really, really good point and asked you to do some research on that. And then he was concerned about cost of sprinklers. And then also there was a question about the process to make change if we wanted to. So I really think that based on this follow-up information, it probably would be good to have you at maybe our next meeting to do a follow-up on this issue. Does everybody agree with that?
You might need a fire marshal or something too.
No, and I'm going to talk to the fire marshal, at least the acting one for now. So does that work for everybody to have a part 2 of this discussion at our next meeting? Okay, great. Will you be willing to
Certainly.
join us and follow up with these questions?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. All right, gosh, we're done with our agenda for the most part. Any other comments anybody like to make? Ms. Domboski?
I just have to say, I love how you run a meeting. I just want to say that.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. And there's, the usuals are not here today in the audience. I had to say that.
Who
But
do you mean?
anyway.
Maybe they didn't get noticed?
No, we know.
Oh.
So anyway, so there's no audience participation. And Mr. Trainee, did you have something?
No, I'm missing, you stands over there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's yeah.
No discussion.
Anyway, thank you everybody for being here. Meeting's adjourned.